Hi, I'm comedian Kip Addotta, author of Kip Addotta, Confessions of a Comedian, and you're watching Mr. Media.
I'm Bob Andelman, and this is a Mr. Media interview. You can see, hear, and read more than 1,200 of my previous celebrity interviews at MrMedia.com. That's MRmedia.com. Subscribe to the show on YouTube, Apple Podcast, iTunes, Spotify, Google Play, Mixcloud, Alexa Podcasts, or Stitcher, and please follow me on Twitter and Facebook. And if you like the show, please tell the world with a 5-star review on iTunes or Apple Podcasts. On today's show, I'll talk to comedian Kip Addotta. He just published his autobiography, Kip Addotta, Confessions of a Comedian. Stick around. I guess I thought I knew Kip Addotta. Now that I'm reading his autobiography, Kip Addotta, Confessions of a Comedian, I realize I don't know him at all. My guest today was a staple of the 1970s, 1980s, and 1990s comedy scene as he found it. Comedy clubs in Los Angeles, nightclubs in Miami and Las Vegas, and an endless series of guest appearances on the talk shows that could make or break a comic's career in those days. The Mike Douglas Show, The Merv Griffin Show, and of course, The Tonight Show with Johnny Carson. But behind the curtain, as his memoir reveals, his early personal life was anything but glamorous. His mother deserted him and his father when he was just 2 years old. Never saw her again. He slept in his baby crib until the age of 9. His father, who never physically left, emotionally abandoned Kip shortly thereafter, although he delivered beatings to his son long into his teens. And Dad threw Kip out of the house at age 15 with just 2 dimes to his name and the clothes on his back. Kip was raised by his fiercely protective paternal grandmother, a Sicilian woman he described as being a maid woman within the ranks of the mafia. Because of her ties, Kip was escorted and protected whenever he traveled east of the Mississippi by Goodfellas. His first wife, Mary, mother of his first 2 children, died tragically at age 23. Need I go on? This is a book you really must read, and I haven't even told you about his encounters with Frank Sinatra, Elvis Presley, and yes, Kenny Kramer of future Seinfeld fame. Kip Addotta, welcome to Mr. Media.
Thank you very much, Mr. Media. May I call you by your first name?
You may certainly call me by anything you like.
All right, Bob. Thank you.
All right. So, Kip, I have to ask you, how much of your personal story did the public know before you wrote your memoirs?
Well, none of it. Not even my children really knew that part of my life, which is why I wrote the book mainly because my children, I wanted them to know what their father's life was like, even before they were born.
And what was it like, you made the decision to do this, but you had to dredge up some pretty horrible memories to tell this story.
Yes, they're my mountaintops, and I shaved them off. There's a lot of valleys in there too that are not in the book, but people seem to appreciate the fact that the book is not ponderous.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you tell the story as you just did that statement, and you move on to the next. You're not doing a lot of navel gazing, I guess.
Right.
Did you have any second thoughts about what you did reveal after it was in print and you could hold it in your hand?
No, I did not, Bob. I'm simply amazed at the response to this book. It's available worldwide, and I didn't really think that the book would take off as it is. It's unbelievable to me that people are not only remember me, but through the word of mouth, younger people are buying the book. People that wouldn't have known me unless the book had been printed.
Mm-hmm. Well, it was interesting. We crossed paths on Facebook, and I remember thinking, okay, there's a lot of people who say that they're so-and-so. And so I checked a little further, and it's like, oh, that is Kip Addotta. How cool is that? And then
Facebook page is a Joe Schmo page because I want to exchange with people. I don't want a fan page. I could have a fan page if I wanted.
Sure.
Or what they call a public figure page. I certainly qualify. I've got almost 4 times as many people on my blocked list as I do on my friend list.
Are any of them comedians?
Some of them are, but mostly what they are people who don't seem to have a vocabulary and have difficulty communicating thoughts without using profane language. And I have granddaughters, and I don't want them reading these profane words on my Facebook page. However, I'm loosening that up a little bit now because as my granddaughters get older, I've always said, I know they're going to be exposed to this, but it's not going to be on my page.
Right. And what kind of feedback have you gotten from, you have 3 children, Victor, Kathy, and Frank. And how many grandchildren?
3 girls.
3 girls. And what kind of feedback have you gotten from family about what you put in the book?
None.
None?
None. Not a peep.
Really?
Yes. They're coming around. They will read the book. And I hope, enjoy the book. But they're cautious because in telling my life, they know I'm going to be exposing parts of their lives. Well, what they're going to find out is there is no negatives as far as Dad is concerned. There are no negatives about my children. Mm-hmm. I can't think of one. My son Victor is a master cabinet maker, carpenter. I sent you a link to his website so that you could peruse his work. Mm-hmm. My daughter Kathy is a force of nature. She's the mother of my granddaughter, one of my granddaughters, and married to a wonderful man, Michael, who's a school teacher. And I've never known any man who enjoys being around children more than my son-in-law, Michael. I love this guy. And let's see, what else? My son, Frank, is a cordon bleu chef. Kathy, my daughter, my middle child, is a realtor in Simi Valley, California. Mm-hmm. And the story plods on.
Were you hoping that they would read the book and maybe it would explain to them things about you from when they were growing up that maybe were not clear at the time to children, but now that they have children of their own?
Exactly. You hit the nail right on the head, Bob. I wanted them to. I wanted partly, yes, to understand that being a parent is no different in my case than it is in their case.
And yet, I wanted to ask you about this. I don't have a lot of great things to say about my dad, but by comparison to what I read about your dad, my dad is like Phil Donahue. And you talk in the book several times about that you were away more often than you would have liked to have been, that you were not always there to help raise your kids. I had to wonder, let me see if I can ask this in a respectful way, but I had to wonder if, because of the way you were raised, your mother left, your dad was an a-hole, pardon my French, that as much as you were away for work, you were on the road as a comic, I get that. But was part of it that you just really weren't sure how to be a dad and thought maybe it was better if their mother raised them?
Not at all.
Okay.
I was as good a dad as I was capable of being. Even though I was out of town 3 weeks out of every month on average, what I would do when my children were out of school on recess or, summer break, I would take them in turn with me on the road because I wanted them to know what Daddy was doing when he was gone. And all three of them, in turn, as during every summer, I would bring them along, put them on a plane, and they would learn about room service and skiing and show business. And I'll never forget my son Frank, my youngest child, was on the road with me, and we were at Caesar's Palace. And he was a big Kiss fan. And I took him behind the curtain, and I opened the curtain just a crack, and I let him peek through, and I said, "Can you pick out where Gene Simmons is?" Because without makeup. And he spotted him immediately. He said, "He's in the King's Row, the first booth." Right on. So I went to Gene Simmons. I told him, "My son's a great fan of yours, blah, blah, blah." I didn't ask him for anything, really. Well, there was 20 minutes later a knock at my door, my dressing room door. I opened it, and there was Gene Simmons balancing a long stem rose. And he was balancing it, and he walked in, and he walked over to my son, and he handed it to my son, Frank. And, well, it's a moment that I'll cherish all my life. And I've run into Gene Simmons here and there around Los Angeles, and he remembers me. And I always say, "Mr. Simmons, Kip Addotta." I always, when I run into someone that I know or have met in the past, the first thing out of the mouth is, "I'm Kip Addotta." I take the gamble out of the deal for them. Mm-hmm. So they don't have to pretend like they remember my name,
right?
Which is so uncomfortable.
That's funny. As you were talking about Gene, I had my own run-in with Gene. I had interviewed him for a newspaper interview 30-some years ago, and after the interview, he said, "Hey, we're going to be in wherever. Why don't you come around backstage and introduce yourself?" And a lot of people do that. And I thought, I'm actually going to do it. So I went around backstage, and he and I were talking, and it was very nice. Very pleasant man, a very pleasant guy. And the promoter of the concert came around, and he's got his arms around two beautiful women, and he comes up to us, and he says, "Gene, I've got some ladies who'd like to meet you." And Gene turns to them, and they're introduced. He puts his arms around them, and he turns back. He says, "Bob, business calls. Nice to meet you." So
yeah, he's an extremely intelligent man, and he, as far as I'm concerned, is a very approachable and a kind man. But you know what? Bright people are kind.
Well, he is an interesting fellow. There's no doubt about that. All right, so actually, one more thing about growing up I wanted to ask you about, because as we were talking, and I asked you about father figures, the reality is your Uncle Victor was actually more of a father figure for you, and his children, I gather from the book, were well-adjusted. They loved their dad, and you spent. Stop me if I'm overstating it, but you spent some summers there, and you saw a very different relationship with a father and children, I think.
Well, yes, my Uncle Victor was a made member of the Bonanno crime family. And also a hairstylist as a front. Uh, we could fill the entire interview, Bob, with stories about my Uncle Victor. I loved him. I named my first child after him,
Mm-hmm.
and I will cherish my memories of him for life. But he was when he was in Rockford, Illinois, visiting us. He was a different man than he was in Brooklyn, New York,
Hmm.
when we were spending time there at 180 Sterling Place, Sterling and Flatbush Avenue. Uh, I don't know where you want me to go, Bob.
That's okay.
I
All right.
can.
Was it Flatbush Avenue? That's interesting. I spent some time on Flatbush Avenue. My aunt and uncle lived there, so we would go a couple times a year and visit. But I don't remember us. I think we were a generation apart, so I don't remember crossing paths with you or Uncle Victor. But yeah, no, I'm sure that there's a lot more stories to be told there. But along that line, I got to ask you about your grandmother. Um, you describe her in the book as a saint, but you also make no bones about the fact that she was intimately tied up with the mob in New York City, that she was a made woman for her work in recruiting young Sicilian men to come over and work for organized crime.
Exactly.
That's amazing.
Her name or her title was Donna Ciccia Francesca Addotta. First word was Donna, that's female for Don.
Mm. Oh, okay.
Uh,
I get that.
Donna Ciccia was her street name Cheech, the female version of the word Cheech. Hey, Cheech! Well, she would be Ciccia. Francesca Addotta. Her maiden name was Guida. She was the only member of the Bonanno family at that time that could read and write in both English and Sicilian.
Hmm.
Therefore, the service she provided was to recruit eligible young men from Sicily to come over and be soldiers for the Bonanno crime family. My grandmother was also extremely religious person. She knew prayers that not even the Italian priests knew. And when it was appropriate for those prayers to be said, they would have to come to her to say them. For instance, on St. Joseph's Day in March, all the St. Joseph altars that are put in people's home. That could be a book in itself. But I went to church from the time I was 6 to the time I was 15. I went to church every single morning, kind of like the Wahlberg guy does church every day,
Right.
and then twice on Thursdays, because there was a Thursday benediction in Stations of the Cross. So, and of course, every afternoon, no matter what, we would say the rosary, kneeling at a trunk in the front room of our home. And she taught me also, she wanted me to know how to take care of myself. And so she taught me how to cook. She taught me how to sew. She taught me how to iron. She taught me how to do laundry. She taught me how to clean the house. All of this knowledge, practical knowledge, I have drawn upon my entire life. And I am a fastidious person, so...
Do you still dip the broom tip into the toilet to sweep up the dust?
Good. Oh, boy, Bob. Yes. You dip the broom in the toilet to make make it wet so that you can get all the dust from out of the corners. And yes, indeed, you are reading my book.
I am. And folks, I told Kip I'm about 70% of the way through the book, but we only started talking about doing this interview like 2 days ago, so I got as far as I could. But yeah, some of the details are very sharp in my mind.
I guess I'm to the point. I tell my story and be done with it. I'm as I've mentioned before, I'm amazed at the response. Where should I go with this? Tell me.
All right. One more thing. One or two more things about Grandma Addotta. She had you on a career track while she was alive to be a priest, which was a direction that you abandoned when she passed on in your teens. How do you think she would feel about how you eventually found your way as a stand-up comedian? It doesn't seem like there was a lot of humor, perhaps, around the family.
Many faceted personality. One of the things you don't know, because it's not in the book, is she was an avid wrestling fan.
Of course she was.
Back in the days of Gorgeous George and Vern Gagne and the Sheik of Araby and all of these wrestlers. And she would watch wrestling. Boy, she loved to watch wrestling. And of course, she hated the villains and she loved the nice guys.
Yeah, I wouldn't. I guess. But would she approve of Kip the comedian?
I think so, because I've led as honorable a life as I'm able to, and that's all that counts. Right. Are you an honorable person or not? And I feel that I am. I'm not saying I'm a saint. I am not a saint. I've made many mistakes along the way, but who hasn't? Even Alfred Einstein, was it Albert Einstein? He was a theorist, but his wife was the mathematician. She would prove his theories for him.
So, all right. So let's change gears at this point. Let's talk a little bit about the career that you had. We'll skip over Steak and Shake and the used car lot and all that kind of stuff. What was the attraction to you of being on stage? And before you answer that, I want to just point out that you originally stepped up as a singer. Music. It might have been music at that point.
Only because I wanted stage time. I started a little band around Northern Illinois, and just recently, yesterday, finally got in contact with our drummer of the time, Marvin Stope. And so we traveled around and did shows, and then would do 5 minutes of comedy at the end of each set, and we'd do 5 sets a night. We'd do 5 45-minute sets, and they'd take 15-minute breaks. So it was, you might say, a show band.
So you developed the comedy. You got through that. You had, 25 minutes of it?
And and then I sold all the band equipment to my partner, and my family and I moved to Los Angeles so for Dad to become a comedian. I was just naive enough to think that I can do this. And of course I was terrible. But I learned.
Fast learner, apparently.
Listened to good advice. I think I recount in the book meeting my favorite guy from the old school before my time was Jack Benny. I loved Jack Benny. And I met Jack Benny once at NBC Studios, where I was waiting to go on stage, and in the hallway there was Jack Benny. And I said, Mr. Benny, I'm a young comedian. My name is Kip Addotta. I'm a young comedian. I wonder, do you have any advice for me? And he thought for a moment, and he said, well, yes, I do, young man. He said, remember, silence is your friend. It means they're listening.
Said the man to you, the man who said, when he said your money, your life, and he said, and there's a long pause, and he said, I'm thinking it over.
Supposedly the longest laugh
right.
in the history of television.
He was brilliant at the pauses. He was just great at that stuff. But
And I found again another person that was approachable, because I was approachable myself. So I've never been sorry that I've approached anyone of fame, because they've all been ladies and gentlemen.
How did it happen? 18 months after you arrive in LA, you're on the Tonight Show. Was that the era that you were in, that could happen so fast? I mean, now men and women, they talk about, well, you got to be out there 5-10 years before you can expect something like that.
Well, I was parking cars during lunch hours at a place directly across NBC called Chadney's, and I was making about $15 a day doing that. And somebody came out and told me that there was a new place opening up, and it had only been open for 2 weeks, called the Comedy Store, and run by Sammy Shore and Rudy DeLuca. And so the next night, my wife and I went to the Comedy Store to see the show, and then I started trying to get spots there, and it was very difficult. I would get on at 1 o'clock in the morning, and the audience is worn out and they're demoralized and so on and so forth. But I was so determined and driven that I noticed that the other comedians were doing one set a night at one place. Well, I would do 5. I'd go to the Comedy Store, the Ye Little Club. I'd go to the Improv. I'd go to a place called Showbiz, run by the unknown comic, Murray Langston. Then I'd go to the Palomino Lounge every night, 5 clubs a night. So I was loaded for bear. I was writing all day long. I was constantly writing, and I was quite prolific at it. I would do the jokes in 5 different places, but more importantly was that I would record myself, an audio recording, and more important than that, the most difficult thing of all is to listen to those recordings every day.
That had to be hard.
Yeah, it's difficult, and if a joke didn't work, and I couldn't after a certain amount of time, it just wouldn't pan out, I would put it in a file and revisit it 3 months later. So I was obsessed with it. And another fellow at the same place, Chadney's, told me that there was a manager, an entertainment manager, and I'm getting to the answer to your question.
That's okay.
And he told me there was an entertainment manager called Marty Pitchinson. And so I called Marty Pitchinson, and I said, I'm a young comedian. I need management, which somehow I knew I needed management. And so we had a meeting, and he took me on as a client. And then a month later, he was hired by the largest management company in California, a company called B&B, Bernard, Neufeld, and Bash. Alan Bernard, Mace Neufeld, Alan Bernard, Mace Neufeld, and Sherwin Bash. And one of the clauses in his contract with them is that he was allowed to bring his current clients with him. So I went to B&B. So all of a sudden I'm being managed by the largest, most powerful management company anywhere. People that had Neil Sedaka, people that had the Carpenters, people that had John Davidson, and on and on and on and on. This is big time stuff here. They had Fleetwood Mac.
Captain and Tennille, right?
And Captain and Tennille. So if you want any of those names to appear on The Tonight Show, you can have that. You can have Karen and her brother Carpenter on The Tonight Show, but you got to have Kip Addotta on there too. So these deals are made. That's how I got on The Tonight Show 18 months after I hit town here.
As your career built, you became the staple of top nightclubs and a favorite and a friend in some cases of people like Frank Sinatra, Lou Rawls. But my favorite story, well, okay, I think this is my favorite story in the book, has got to be the day that you essentially called up and invited Elvis Presley to sneak out of his Vegas hotel and have a play date with you. What the hell were you thinking?
I know. That's a pertinent question. A few days earlier, I was working at Caesar's Palace, and Mr. Presley was working at what's then called the International Hotel. Now it's called the Hilton. But at that time, it was the International Hotel. And it had the largest showroom in Las Vegas at the time. And he had just opened, and he was having a press conference after his show. And I went to the press conference. And he was going from one person to the other. And, hello, I'm Elvis Presley, and blah, blah, blah. And he finally got to me. And he said, hello, I'm Elvis Presley. I said, I'm Kip Addotta, Mr. Presley. I'm working over at Caesar's Palace. And he said, how was your audience tonight? I said, timid. And he said, yeah, ours too. So then a few days later, I called his suite at the International Hotel, and and someone answered, well, a member of the Memphis Mafia. Hello, who is this? This is Kip Addotta. I'd like to talk to Mr. Presley. And the guy said, Kip Addotta? And I heard Elvis in the back said, I'll take that call. So he took my call, and I said, Mr. Presley, let's go-karting. Well, he said, Kip, I can't go out. I'll be mobbed. I said, Mr. Presley, take the chrome suit off, put a ball cap on, and some tennis shoes and jeans, and let's go-karting. And there was a long pause. And I just felt that he was looking down at himself and was indeed wearing a chrome suit.
Right.
So he said to me, kind of chuckled, and he said, pick me up out back in 30 minutes. So I went over, and sure enough, he comes back, the back door out, he gets in the car, and we go-karting. And that happened, I think, 3 different times. Now, the Memphis Mafia guys did not like it.
Big surprise.
Yeah. And, but...
Colonel Parker probably wouldn't have been too happy either.
Who?
Colonel Parker?
Oh, Colonel Parker. I never had a run-in with him.
Good.
You know, when he was at the... Colonel Parker took 50%.
Yeah, that's crazy.
And when he was working in Vegas, Elvis was making... less than the head waiter, but actually take-home money.
Wow, that's crazy. But it's just a great story. And you know, another person you have in there that you tell great stories about is your old friend Kenny Kramer, who you knew before Larry David did. I mean, I just can't.
Last night we were on the phone together.
Is that right?
The real Kramer. Michael Richards portrayed on Seinfeld was as Cosmo Kramer. Well, my friend Kenny Kramer was the Kramer. What question were you about to ask?
Oh, I don't even know. What was he like? I mean, would you have ever guessed that he could have inspired this character on TV?
No.
But he was a little crazy.
Well, yeah. He was a pleasant crazy. Mm-hmm. He wasn't scary crazy.
Right, and that's kind of the way Larry David always portrayed him, that he was pleasant crazy. He wasn't like, you're going to wake up in the middle of the night and he's going to be pointing a rifle at your head.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And Kenny and I would go around, and remember I mentioned earlier about going to 5 clubs. Well, we went together. We were our wingman. He was my wingman. And we would go to those clubs and work out. And a great guy. To this day, this guy, he's a wonderful man, and he's a moneymaker.
Mm-hmm.
You remember, are you old enough to remember those little LED lights?
I read about that in the book. Yeah, I knew what you were talking about. I never had them, but yeah.
Okay. Yeah, he invented those. And no, he's a real entrepreneur.
Is he still doing the tour of New York? Is he still leading?
Exactly. He does the real Kramer tours.
Right, yeah. That's just amazing. Well, okay,
and
so
he offered that role on the show and turned it down.
Yeah, I read about that.
The role.
Yeah, fascinating. It was so much fun to see him pop up in your book. I was like, what the hell? I mean, as soon as you said Kenny Kramer, I went, no, it couldn't. Yep, it sure is. Same guy. So just a couple more questions, and we'll let you out of here. I wondered, as many years as you've been doing comedy, whose work have you consistently admired through the years? Who was, held up?
Well, I've already mentioned people before my time, Jack Benny, and I always liked Phil Harris, but I think Steve Martin is the big cheese as far as my time,
mm-hmm.
and younger than me. There's some good comedians out there. Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Wendy Liebman is very good one-liner comic.
Interesting choice. Okay.
Yeah. I have an old joke an observation that I made a long time ago. When I started in this business, there were 50 comedians in the United States. You know how many there are now?
No, how many? 50. I think there's a few of them are going, wait a minute, am I part of that 50?
Decide. The public will decide. The public makes the choice. In this case, Kip Addotta, Confessions of a Comedian, my autobiography. I didn't decide to write a successful book. It's the audience that decides that.
Right. This week, as we're talking, is also the week that an extremely famous and successful comedian was convicted of aggravated assault on 3 women, Bill Cosby. I as a contemporary of yours, essentially, I got to ask you, what did you think of all this? And do you think, I mean, does his body of work, should it be honored the way it used to be in light of this?
Well, I can only answer that by saying, thank God I never did anything like that. Because, I mean, if his body of work can't stand the hit, would mine? I don't know. But I talk about Mr. William Henry Cosby Jr., which is his full name.
Right.
It's a book. And we worked together quite a bit, and I never saw any sign of. I never even heard the guy said, "Oh, look at her, she's pretty hot." Nothing. So I was blindsided by this, and saddened, of course.
Well, speaking of current events, you mentioned in the book that the last time you did a current event joke was during the Carter administration. You joked about, I don't want to tell your joke, but you were joking about Billy Carter and Jimmy Carter.
Well, I don't do political material. It's, current events is the easiest form of humor because the audience is primed. If something happened 7 hours ago, it doesn't take much setup to get continuity with the audience about the topic. So you can write reams of current events. Jimmy Fallon does it every night. Jimmy Kimmel does it every night. And current events. So I wrote this one joke, and it's kind of dated, really. I was on the Tonight Show, and I'd had this joke, and I wanted to. I knew it was pretty strong, and the joke was referring to the president. I said, but it's not easy to gain the public's confidence when you've got a brother who's constantly embarrassing you. But Billy puts up with it.
It was a great joke. I wondered if you were working today, and I should point out to people that you have retired from the stage. You're not on stage these days. But if you were working today, do you think you could avoid the making Trump jokes, or it's become
Absolutely.
so much of you
Jerry
could?
Seinfeld avoids it.
True.
If you were going to talk about the human condition and the foibles of humanity, you don't have to bring up our president. I didn't do it with Obama. I didn't do it with Reagan. I've never done it. That's not my job. My job is to entertain. My job is not to lecture. It just seems to be unproductive to me. But, on that topic, people want to be liked. You want people to like you. My name is Kip. I want people to like me. So I have a suspicion that a lot of this negative Trump comments are made because people think that if they make them, other people will like them.
Interesting. All right. Do you miss the stage?
The best part of my day was on stage. I love working on stage. I love it. But it's difficult today because there's so much profanity in these clubs now. These guys are depending on shock value, and the audience becomes demoralized. They don't want to hear about the kitchen sink joke or the observational humor. I was a pretty good boy. I was not shocking. I had no shock value. It still got big laughs. Big laughs.
Okay. But do you miss it?
Oh, sure I do. But I'm not. I keep myself busy. As we were discussing earlier, Bob, isn't it wonderful to have something to do and to have passion for something? You have passion for what you do, and I have passion for what I'm occupying my time with. And that's quite important for anyone.
All right. Well, I have one final question for you, Kip. I want you to think about this. This could make or break the interview now. How many times does a man have to catch his pecker in the zipper before he learns not to do it? Is it 7? Is it 8 or more?
About 9 times.
Is it now 9 times?
I think it's about 9 times. When one finally gets that, it's not good to get your pecker caught in your zipper. Crying out loud.
Kip owns up in the book to 7 times. Now, since the book was written, apparently it's up to 9 times. So maybe we'll check back in a year and we'll see how many times it is then.
Hopefully we will.
That would be nice.
I'm still on 9.
That would be good. Folks, listen, you can order Kip Addotta's new memoir, Kip Addotta, Confessions of a Comedian, wherever great books are sold, or you can order it right now at a great price on MrMedia.com, mrmedia.com. If you're watching on the site, just below the video, you'll see the cover of the book. You just click on it. It'll take you to Amazon. You can order the physical book and have it to you in a day or so, or you can download it as an ebook, which is what I did because I needed to get to it real quick. Either way.
And coming soon, the audiobook.
Oh, excellent. Well, that'll be even more fun. Kip, you have a website, I believe?
I do, but really, I spend most of my time on social media. Uh, I've also devised a way for people to get autographed copies of my work. So that's in play.
Okay.
All they do is send me a self-addressed stamped envelope to my office, and I send them in return a I'm going to grab it right now, one of them right now. My friend Rob Lilly.
Oh, book plate.
This is a sticker. I can personalize it, autograph it, and send it back to them so they can paste it right in my book, and I don't have to go to a book signing. Good God.
Yeah, don't do that. They're terrible. All right, so I know you're on Twitter and you're on Facebook. People can find you there. And then there is the website. It's kipaddotta.com. KIPADDOTTA. Two
Right.
D's, two T's, folks. Kip Addotta, it was so much fun reading the book and spending time with you this afternoon. Thank you so much for joining us on Mr. Media.
My pleasure. Mr. Media, thank you so much. Thank you.
You're very welcome. Mr. Media is recorded live before a studio audience that will repeat after me. We commit to the interview. We go through the interview. And we never ask permission to tell the interviewee that this part is a joke. In the new media capital of the world, St. Petersburg, Florida. See that? I made Kip Addotta laugh.
Well, that's what, commit to the joke, go through the joke, and never, ever ask permission to tell the joke.
Yeah, that's a classic.
Did you hear the one about the? Is the mistake that's mostly made, thereby alerting the prey.
Hi, this is Rich Scheidner. And if you've ever wondered what it was like to be a stand-up comedian in the 1980s, I'm going to do you a big favor. Instead of billions of dollars for a time machine, you can just spend $24.95 and buy my new book, Kicking Through the Ashes, My Life as a Stand-Up in the 1980s Comedy Boom. It will save you money and give you thrills. It will take you there. Go to my website, richscheidner.com, go to amazon.com, and buy this book.
Subscribe to the show on YouTube, Apple Podcast, iTunes, Spotify, Google Play, Mixcloud, Alexa Podcasts, or Stitcher, and please follow me on Twitter and Facebook. And if you like the show... I got to start over. I have to turn Alexa off. Every time she hears her name, she talks to me. Wait a minute.